Hello, hello. Welcome to Replenish, the atmosphere of discovery, where we discover the master's plan for our lives. Today's session is titled Limitations. Today, we will be talking about limitations. So, a limit is a point or level beyond something that you have been told or assumed that you may not extend past. Okay. Chains, shackles, and yokes set limits, create blockages, and restrict you. So, before we even get started, if some limits pop up in your mind, go ahead and start writing them down because we're going to deal with those limits. Write down the thing, the person, or the mindset that you feel has shackled you into submission to its plans for you, right? If you have no idea what has placed limits on you, then keep listening because we're going to name quite a few limitations, okay? Sometimes we use the words limit and boundary interchangeably, but I want to separate them for the sake of this session. We're going to discuss limits as being the things that are imposed on us by other people and things, while boundaries are self imposed, right? That we set to limit the access of other things and other people to us, right? So, external actions, which are actions that are not caused by you, can create limitations when particular boundaries are affected by them. Okay, and this is where limits and boundaries will intersect. Boundaries are about your internal comfort and willingness, right? So limits and boundaries intersect and interact with each other. Limits are enforced by others, while boundaries are enforced by you, right? And fueled by your self-awareness and your self-control. Okay? So limits set by people can be visible or invisible. Limits set by people can be visible or invisible. Visible physical limits would be like contracts, rules, laws, doors, locks, windows, right? Any physical restrictions that you see. Invisible limits would be negative words, right? Passive aggressive actions, repetitive negative behaviors, cultural mindsets, trauma, expectations, emotional conditioning, right? That causes you to be chained, shackled, and yoked up, right? No one knows that these limits exist until they're spoken out loud or done in public, okay? Hidden limitations are just as effective, if not more, than the ones you actually see, right? You cannot break free from or address what you don't know exists, right? And so replenish requires you to go deeper than the surface. We're not just going to talk about the surface issues. We're going to find the source, dig it up, process it properly, right? And then become better managers of our mind, of our emotions, of the access that we allow people to have to us and our purpose, right? It's up to us to manage those things. And you cannot do that without knowledge. Okay. So each session gives you knowledge and tools, and then you decide if you want to receive that knowledge and then apply it to your life. Right. So whatever you are shackled to, whatever you choose to bind yourself to, must be of God, or you will become oppressed by it, right? If you bind yourself to anything, if you attach yourself to anything, let it be because it is first God's will and God's plan before you decide if it's beneficial, right? Because some things that are beneficial for us don't feel beneficial in that moment, right? So the limits that you have allowed people to place on you, and you start to believe them and make them be the truth, it keeps you from possessing what is rightfully yours, because you will only go as far as that limit, right? The goal can be in view, right? You can see it, but you never reach it because you had more faith in the limitation than your purpose, right? So that limitation holds you back. And so we have to, we can have these perceived limitations because of different situations, limits that were never there, right? It's what we were told or what we assumed, and so that's what we believe, right? We can create limitations for ourselves by making those assumptions, right? Judging from our emotions, judging from our fears, or even limiting our own beliefs and abilities, right? We can create those limitations because of those things that we assume, or we're assuming from an emotional place or from a fearful place. And so we can create those limitations for ourselves. There is no geographical, economical, financial, or generational limit to what can be done when you are operating in your purpose. There is no geographical, economical, financial, or generational limit to what can be done when you are operating in your purpose. The sky is not the limit, it's a step. Okay, I know we've probably heard that all of our life. The sky is the limit. No, the sky is a step, because the power that works in you is available above and beyond what you could imagine, right? And what you could imagine is far beyond the sky. So the sky is a step for you, it's not the limit. And so the only no's that you should receive are the ones that are because you're thinking too small, right? Or because this yes will take you in the wrong direction, right? No, we hate to hear no, but no is God telling us to try another door, right? A different building, a different street, a different city. Okay. Some of you are in the wrong city, asking the wrong people. So you might be in the wrong places, which is the reason that you're getting the no's. Okay. When you believe a limit, it becomes real to you, even when it's false, even if it's a lie. When you believe it, it becomes real to you. And so this allows the limitation to cross over into your thought patterns, right? Affecting your boundaries, affecting your faith, right? Changing your focus because you believed it. So you now have a wall that prevents you from thinking further, from imagining further, from envisioning or planning any further than that perceived limit, right? And so you won't know the possibilities or solutions that are available to you because of that wall, because of that limit, okay? So how many limits do you have that are perceived or assumed, but they're not actually real? So I want to think about all the reasons that you gave for why something is not available to you. And ask yourself, are these limits perceived or assumed? Are they actually real limits? Is that really stopping you from doing what you need to do? And so assumptions formed from fear, pain, or societal influence often turn into excuses for you to limit yourself. Okay. And this is a false sense of security. This is a false sense of safety. Yeah, you might feel safe, right? But you're living below your capability and below God's desire for you, right? God's limits are only for protection and direction, right? That's the only reason why God would limit you, is for your protection or for direction. Okay. So we have community and cultural limitations, right? Your sight is limited when you are in a community or belong to a culture that limits you. If the common response to your dreams and ideas are, no, you can't do that. No, that's impossible, right? Or that will never happen. If that's the common response whenever you tell someone and that's a part of your culture or a part of your community, what your dreams and ideas are, and you see the rest of the world continuing to do these things that you're saying, you are experiencing limitations in that community or that culture. Okay. You're watching the world do what you've seen or heard all your life someone tell you you can't do, right? But that limited mindset that you adopted has now become your identity. So you can't even see it when you see it. You see the world doing it, but somehow that community and that culture that you are part of has convinced you that you cannot do it, right? You see the world doing it, but somehow you still believe that you can't do it, right? These flawed mindsets we have may be due to the environment that we have agreed to continue to be a part of, right? As a child, you don't have a choice about what environment you're in. But as an adult, this is your decision, okay? And your environment plays a massive role in shaping your limitation. It's very important. It's very important where you choose to live, where you choose to raise your children, right? I want you to go and listen to session 56. That one is confronting mindsets. And also session 67. That is community, right? to break those limits that have been placed on you, to break those mindsets that you have, right? If you're having trouble even addressing the mindsets because you don't know what kind of mindset you have, go to Confronting Mindsets. That session will help you, okay? So every barrier, every blockage, every destructive limitation that you have seen, heard, or felt must be recognized as an opponent and not a permanently fixed place that cannot be overthrown. Okay. The way we think, the way we act, the way we live our lives is a result of what we believe. We can say we don't believe something or we didn't receive something, but if our lives is not showing that, in your heart you believed it, in your mind whatever the naysayer said is still stuck in your head. Okay. What we believe is based on what we know, and if we don't know anything about what is limiting us, we won't believe we have the power to overcome it. Okay, does that make sense? So you may have a set of values that have been instilled in you as a child, right? By your community, by your parents, your guardians, even by society, right? And sometimes these sets of values shape you into becoming a very exceptional person. And then other times they stop you from reaching your full potential, right? Negative values limit you by causing you not to see who you are and who God created you to be, right? They're always opposing your purpose. They're always opposing your true character, right? All you see is the limit of what someone else has done in that area, right? So you feel that that's all that you will ever do because no one in your sphere of influence has ever overcome that limitation or broke through that barrier. We definitely see the success stories of people who decided to change their mindset, to overcome that set of values, right? So let's switch over to how boundaries are affected by those limitations. When you set a boundary for someone, you are marking your limits for them, right? It is not the other way around. They don't get to tell you when they've crossed the line, right? And some of us have been used to this, where others get to authorize your limits, which places them in control of your boundaries, right? But boundaries are internal. They're for your internal comfort, okay? Um, your boundaries are about what is comfortable to you, not them. And so we experience this in our workplace, in the work environment, the church environment, at home with our siblings, right? Friends, children, spouses. We experience people trying to push the limit that you set for them, okay, according to what's comfortable for them, not what's comfortable for you. And so you must learn your authority and how to manage it in a way that you don't allow limits to restrict you in places that you should be excelling in, right? You have the authority to do what you were created to do, right? But if you don't believe that you have a purpose, how will you operate in that authority? Okay. You know how to operate in the authority in areas you're not called to, right? The area that's stressing you out, that may not be the area you have authority in. That's not even your purpose, but it's stressing you out, right? Instead of using your authority in the right place, right? In the right way. And so we often have issues distinguishing between authority and domination. We think dominating people is us having authority, but authority is the power to act or decide for a specific reason in a specific sphere of influence, right? So this, we're talking about parents. They have the authority over the children. Employers have authority over the employees. Any leader, community leader, governmental leader, they have the authority over certain sections of people, right? While dominion is the power to control with no limitations and usually no accountability, right? So you might need to address if you lack if you lack authority in places you should be acting on, right? Or if you're dominating people in areas past the amount of control that you should have over them. Okay, so you don't want to take your authority and abuse it. And so we have to make sure that we manage our authority properly according to godly justice and direction, right? Not our own perceived self-made justice with these ulterior motives that are selfish. Okay, so we don't dominate people, but we are also not avoiding accountability to those we are responsible for, those that we have authority over. Okay, so also in the 85th session, in session 85, that was titled The Power of Expectation. We learn to agree with God's expectation of us, right? Even if we don't believe it yet, just agree with him, right? Agree with what he said, even if you don't believe it yet. And that agreement with him sometimes involves you setting boundaries and limits so that you don't supersede your capacity or anyone else's capacity, right? Your expectations, healthy expectations, should be set based on the truth, right? Without crossing boundaries or limits of others. Okay. So you cannot expect things past someone else's limit, okay, or the limit of the things that you put your expectations in, right? So if something says it's going to work for 12 months, if you expect it to work 2 years, that's not the truth, right? So you set your expectations based on the truth without crossing boundaries and limits of other people or other things. If someone says I cannot do it, it's not up to you to judge according to you and your strength and your resources if they can do it or not. They said they can't. That's it, right? If the max raise you will get from a certain position, for example, you get upset because they won't raise your salary higher than what they said they would raise it. Okay, you can't get upset about that. That's beyond their limits, right? Um, if you're worried about the certain amount of influence you will receive, if that influence is based on politics, if it's based on people's biased opinions or crooked systems, your expectations shouldn't supersede that limit. If you know the system is crooked in a certain area of your life, why get upset? Why cause pressure if you already know the limits there? That means you need to go to another system. That means you need to go to another place, right? Um, if you don't, it will cause you to feel like your worth or your value is determined by their limit for you instead of what you actually deserve. So if you stay a part of companies and a part of systems and organizations and things like that are that cause you to like be stuck and stagnant in one place, you cannot get upset, right? Because if you stay there, you will continue to feel like your worth or your value is determined by their limits. Does that make sense? So we do have the authority and the ability to set limits for our feelings, right? We have that authority and the ability. A lot of us didn't know we had the ability to set limits for our feelings, right? How long do you want to feel those negative feelings? How long do you want to think those negative thoughts? How long do you want to act out those negative behaviors? Write down those common negative feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, and then set a limit, right? Instead of giving them an indefinite amount of time to live within you and make decisions for you. Okay? Those negative thoughts are making decisions for your life, right? Those negative feelings you're allowing to go on for days and days is making decisions for your life, right? Those negative behaviors you want to act out, you're not controlling, is making decisions about your future, right? So when setting your boundaries, make sure it is from a place where you're no longer viewing yourself as a victim, right? You're no longer seeing yourself as inferior to everyone else, right? You're not setting boundaries from a place of fear or the automatic expectation of failure. That's not setting boundaries. So I'm not talking about setting boundaries because you're fearful. I'm talking about setting boundaries because they're healthy, right? So you're not setting boundaries to live in fear. Does that make sense? The fear session, if you're struggling with fear, that's session 57. Okay. You cannot ignore your fears, right? The fears you have, the fearful feelings, the setbacks, or the fears of failure, you should have power over that, right? But if you don't acknowledge that they are there, how will you demonstrate power over them? Right? You must be willing to learn. You must be willing to be taught to gain knowledge. And so we have an unlimited access to knowledge through the internet, right? When you have information about something, you are less fearful of it. When you have information about something, you are less fearful of it. The more you know the limits of the things that you are afraid of, the less power it has over you, right? There was an incident where I had a toothache, right? It was horrible, horrible, horrible. And so this is a spiritual incident. And so it was horrible. I had to go outside and just scream. And I'm just like, what is this? What's happening? And I had a vision of this huge hand holding back like this army on horses, right? And then I heard, that's all the enemy can do. So when I learned the limit, right, I was like, oh, pain went away. When I learned the limit of the thing that I was fearful of, and God was instructing me, like, this is not even heaven fighting for you. So like, if I let one of them go, like, it's done. But this is all he can do without me even fighting for you. So when you learn the limit of the thing that you are afraid of, it has less power over you. Okay. The strongest fear is the fear of the unknown, right? When you feel safe, you don't tend to be terrorized or given to anguish so quickly or easily, right? So it's important that you desire to learn, right? To gain knowledge, to gain understanding. Okay. Anguish is torment that has reached your emotions, right? It's in your soul. And it's no longer just in your mind, in your thoughts, or in your feelings. It's in your heart now, right? And so before anything turns to anguish, you want to handle it in your thoughts. You give it a limit, right? When you give your thoughts a limit, you are able to overcome that. And joy is something that overcomes anguish. Okay. So these places of fear in us are targets. These places of fear in us are targets. Fear is a quick way to be disarmed by your enemy. Be afraid. Okay. There is bondage where there is tormenting fear. It ties you up, it limits you, it blocks you, and keeps you imprisoned, right? Fear is a barrier that creates more barriers by making hiding places, right? Or shelters for different phobias, trauma visions, physical and mental abuse. Fear makes shelters for those things. Okay. And fear is a root barrier because it limits you by paralyzing you, minimizing your vision, right? And distorting the truth. How many of you were afraid of something until you learned something about it, right? And then you realize what you were thinking was a lie. What you were afraid of was based on a lie, right? Unacknowledged fear keeps you unarmed, right? It keeps you unable to fight the thing that is holding you back, right? Fear builds those shelters for trauma and becomes a hiding place for those things, right? So we avoid addressing and acknowledging fears, and we never get past them. You can keep avoiding it. You can keep pretending to feel safe, right? But you will never get past them. Avoiding things won't solve them. Avoiding things creates limitations. We have a session on avoidance. That was session 28. That was way at the beginning. We're on session 87 now, right? So avoidance is session 28. Okay, so we naturally tend to avoid things that cause discomfort, right? Just because you are uncomfortable doing something doesn't mean that it's not necessary for you to do it, okay? That discomfort can be an interruption that you allow to cause stagnation, right? When you allow discomfort to make you stagnant, you just stay right in that lane, right? Not willing to cross over to see what courage has to say, right? Discomfort is not always bad. Discomfort challenges your discipline, your stability, and your faithfulness. That's what discomfort does. It actually tests how disciplined you are, how stable you are, right? Discomfort tests how faithful you are. So be willing to be uncomfortable so that you can accomplish the goals that you have, right? You will experience discomfort in every area and every season of your life. You cannot avoid it, right? So unchain yourself and overcome the fear of people's opinions and expectations because you are perfect according to God's standard for you, not man's standard. Man has a standard that they impose on you that now becomes your standard that is above or beneath God's standards for you, right? And so you have to take that first step to gain the courage that you need to have those hard conversations, to make those hard decisions, right? And put yourself in the world as God's handcrafted masterpiece, okay? And so this means you have to stop avoiding yourself in order to avoid other people's reactions, right? Break those limitations off of you so that you no longer avoid happiness, because that's what you're actually avoiding. You're avoiding happiness. You're avoiding peace. You're avoiding growth. You're avoiding greatness. Okay? Avoidance and discomfort are limit builders. They build limits for you. They create limits for you. Okay? They create limits for your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your vision for the future. Okay? Avoiding discomfort causes stagnation. Just because something is hard or scary does not mean that it's not necessary. Okay. And many people stop right at the point of breakthrough because they were unwilling to experience a short-term discomfort. Okay. So when you view the world without those harmful limitations, your ideas are bigger, right? You are motivated by the unknown instead of being fearful of the unknown, right? And your resilience is unmatched. Okay, so you can only reach this mindset by confronting the mindsets that cause limited thinking. Okay, if you're ready to confront those mindsets, that's session 56, okay, on confronting mindsets. So we talk a lot about the mind because your brain can help you or hurt you depending on how you train it, depending on how you renew it, right? Your brain is wired to handle the challenges that you see first, right? It's not wired to make sure that you are whole in every area. It's only wired to make sure you address the challenges that you see first. You have to train it, right? To do that. You have to train your brain to make sure that you are whole in every area. Okay? Your brain is wired to defend your mindset. Okay? Even if your mindset is jacked up. So you have to train it to evaluate the facts, and then you make your mind work for you for your benefit. Okay? It's not wired to do that, right? And especially if it hasn't been trained to do that from your upbringing. And most of us wasn't trained to teach our mind how to work for us, right? Because our parents didn't know. But now that you know, what are you going to do with what you know, right? So even if you were not raised in a community that valued you or placed value in its correct position, right? As an adult, you can place limitations on the access of those who devalue you and also define and refine what you place value in. So a lot of times we've grown up with misplaced values. People place more values on what people think. They place more values on what things look like, what type of car they drive, what type of house they live in, right? Then placing values, things of value in the right position, right? When you stay around people and in situations that don't value you, that's the condition that you impose on everything and everyone else, right? You don't see value in the things that are valuable, such as time. Time is valuable. You don't see value in growth. You don't see value in identity, and you don't see value in purpose, right? You end up valuing short-term, temporal things, such as the desires of the flesh, right? The desires of the eye, the pride of life. Okay. So this all has to do with your perspective. If you're having issues with how you see things, perspective, session 70. We already talked about this. Okay. The next one I want to talk about is a hidden limitation that you may not be aware of, which is bitterness. Bitterness. I don't know if most of you have already listened to that session. We had a session on bitter roots. That was session 75. Okay. Bitterness is a hidden limitation. Bitterness restrains forward movement. Bitterness clouds your vision and poisons your progress. Bitterness limits forward movement by restraining your sight and your path. You can't see. You can't see the direction you're going. Okay. You're just blind and bitter, right? Bitterness keeps you tied to the offense. Bitterness keeps you tied to the people that have offended you. As much as you hate it, that's all you talk about, right? And it ties you to the failures related to your lack of vision. Okay. But forgiveness is like LASIK to your soul. Okay. Forgiveness isn't just to release others, right? It's a release from the limitations. Okay. Because as long as you're bound by offense, you're tied to the person that offended you. Does that make sense? And if you are a Christian, there's no such thing as righteous bitterness. There's no such thing as righteous unforgiveness. Okay. You cannot love and be bitter. It doesn't work. Bitterness rages against love and it pulls down every strand of unity. Okay. Bitterness will make the greatest man or woman succumb to its poisonous fire. It is poisonous to your soul and your physical body, right? But forgiveness transcends a reciprocal expectation. It highlights the unconditional and generous nature of God's grace, the same that is given, that has been given, and is continuing to be given to each one of us. So if God forgives you by intentionally and forcefully throwing away your sin, throwing away your offense when you repent, why shouldn't you do the same for others? And I'm sure that they haven't wronged you as many times as you have offended God in your lifetime, right? When you bring up what your oppressor did, even if the enemy is yourself, like even if it's you, if you're constantly bringing up what you've done in the past, without a testimony, you are continuing to inflict yourself. Okay. So stop re-inflicting pain by rehashing those past hurts. Throw it in the sea. Okay. Let go of offense, including the offenses against yourself as part of your healing, right? Because that's the only way that you're going to progress forward. Certain institutions like your job, your workplaces, churches, or certain social structures place limits on your potential, right? If your expectations exceed the specific system's limitations, that's when you start to feel undervalued, right? Not because you lack worth, not because you're not worthy, right? But because you're in the wrong system, you're in the wrong place. You need an upgrade, right? And so you also have to recognize systemic limits, right? Don't let them redefine your value or place value on you for you, okay? So simple foundational boundaries involve setting times and limits, right? So there are certain limits that you have to set just as a foundation for you, for your life. One of those things is setting times for you to go to sleep, setting a limit for how long you're on social media, how long you're working, how long you're resting, right? Setting a time for yourself to meditate, to refocus, to relax, okay? Setting those time limits for certain negative feelings, refusing to stay in that state of panic, refusing to stay in a state of anxiety and sadness and fear, okay? Set those limits. This is foundational, okay? Setting the limit for the people who enter your personal space or receive personal information about you. Okay. Setting limits for who gets to influence your spirit and your thoughts. This needs to happen, right? Are you surrounded by people who influence you to do things that you don't want to do? You need to set a limit, right? And you have some people that use coercion, you have some people that use pity, and you have people that use force to try to get you to do what they want you to do. Set limits. Okay? Set a limit of how far a conversation is going to go. Set limit to your spending, to your eating, right? And there's also boundaries that you set. And I'm going to list some boundaries that should be non-negotiable. So when you start moving the meter on these boundaries, you have a issue with people putting their limits on you and it's affecting your boundaries, okay? Your faith, that should be non-negotiable. Your integrity should be non-negotiable. Your safety, and I mean your safety mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, should be non-negotiable. Your authenticity, your life, and your peace should be non-negotiable boundaries, When that meter starts changing, you are in the presence of an influence or a person that you have allowed to place its limits on you, and it's caused you to change your boundaries. Okay, so once these are established, means that they have been recognized and accepted by you. These are the boundaries you're setting. These are the limits that you're setting. You don't just stop there with setting it. You continue to manage it. Okay, that for instance, if you put up a wall around a high valued property and then you tell people don't cross it and then you leave, right? What do you think is going to happen? People are going to cross the wall, right? So they have to put people or some other form of security in place to manage the boundary that they've set. That's the same thing you have to do, right? You have to have systems in place to manage those boundaries so that you don't break the boundary that you set for yourself, right? Have people in place that support you, that encourage you to grow, right? Have people that will help you block those intrusions. Okay. And sometimes we get so used to people and systems that cause brokenness that we become very uncomfortable with the ones that benefit us. Okay. Some people like when somebody tell them no, they can't do something because it gives them an excuse not to try. They're waiting for somebody to tell them no because they didn't want to try anyway. Instead of when somebody tells you no, that being an incentive for you or an encouragement for you or motivation for you to try harder. Okay, so I hope this session um, began the process of you recognizing, confronting, and overcoming imposed limitations in order to fulfill your purpose and operate with authority, with clarity, and freedom. Okay, if you are in undervaluing environments, you will struggle to see your worth. So you need to view those limitations. What is limiting you? Is it your environment? Okay. Limits are meant to be challenged if they're not rules. Okay. So don't challenge the speed limit. Okay. The speed limit is not a suggestion, it's the limit. Okay. Don't challenge that. So limits are meant to be challenged if it's not a law or a rule, right? Not blindly accepted, right? Not every limit is true. Some are inherited, some are learned, and some are lies. Some of the limits that you are believing are straight lies, okay? Fear, culture, and trauma are some of the strongest enforcers of limitations, okay? So stop internalizing limits that are set by broken people, broken systems, broken history, right? And not every restriction is from God, right? Sometimes we think, oh, I can't do this, right? Sometimes it's people pretending to hear from God to make you do what they want you to do, right? So if you have traumas, you need to get some help with managing your thoughts and emotions surrounding them, or those limits will remain. Okay. There is a responsibility that we have to take authority over our own lives and not allow our experiences to limit the amount of prosperity, happiness, and fulfillment that we have out of this life. Okay. If your life experiences has limited you, it's time to turn those shackles into victory flags. Okay. So I hope you got something from this session. I hope you wrote down or will write down the things that came up in your mind and your emotions that are limiting you, and hopefully you will address them. I'm pretty sure all of the things you've written down, there is a session on it, right? So this is the 87th session. So go through the list of the full sessions. It's free. If you have time, put your earbuds in your ear and just listen to whatever it is that you wrote on that list of limitations for you. And hopefully you will learn how to overcome those limits. Okay. So that concludes our session. Did we have anyone in the chat with any questions about limitations? Hello to everybody that is here. Evangelist Suzanne, Elvana, Pastor Randon, Evangelist Michelle, Minister B. Hey, y'all. All righty. Well, that concludes this session. I will see you all next Friday at 3 p.m.